Hello, everyone, and welcome to the rescheduled webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Thursday, November 19th. We will hear the presentation, Ethics Cases of the Year. This is a rescheduled webcast from last week because we were having bizarre technical difficulties that seemed to clear up the second we ended our webinar, of course, but we'll try again. For your content questions related to this presentation, you can just type those in your questions box in your GoToWebinar tool panel. We'll answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. If you have technical issues, go ahead and type those in too, and I'll do my best to help you out. Here we go. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2020. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, in particular, we are sponsored by the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration, which is a joint venture of the Maryland National Capital Area, Virginia, and West Virginia chapters, along with the Maryland Department of Planning, Maryland Planning Commissioners Association, Rural Planning Caucus of Virginia and West Virginia University's Land Use and Sustainable Development Law Clinic. And the intent is to address topics that may be of interest to people involved in planning at all levels across multiple regions. So we're happy to have this collaboration with us through a series of webcasts here on the Planning Webcast series. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our upcoming sessions. This is it for 2020. This is everything we've got now through the end of the year. We're already scheduling sessions for 2021. I can't believe it. Head over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast and you can register for all of those sessions. On our webcast webpage, we also have PDF copies of all of our previous session slide decks. We have some on-demand sessions that are available for you to get those CM credits through the end of this year. 2 ethics, 2 law, and I think we might have a general session up there. So be sure to check out our webcast webpage for all that good info. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM ethics credits. For those needing your AICP credits, just head over to planning.org, log into your My APA account. From there, you can either search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage. Lastly, make sure you like us on Facebook. Just search Planning Webcast Series and we'll pop up. That's where I post any immediate information, if we have a schedule change, a date change, if we have new webcasts for you to register for, that's where I post that kind of information. And we also record all of our sessions, so be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, just search Planning Webcast Series on YouTube and we'll pop up, along with our over 300 recordings that are available for you to view. We have over 3,100 subscribers, so be sure to join us so that you get notifications when we post a new session. So I think that's it for my housekeeping. So I am going to turn it over to Andrew Hopewell, who's going to do a quick introduction, and then we're going to actually be viewing, for those of you that were on with us last week, we're going to be viewing a recording for the first portion of this, and then we're going to jump back in and do a live Q&A with Andrew and Earl. So Andrew, go ahead and take it away for us.
Thanks, Christine. Hi, I'm Andrew Hopewell. I am the Professional Development Officer for the Virginia chapter. I'll leave my introduction at that because my longer one is in the actual recorded portion. So I'll turn it over to Earl to introduce himself briefly, and then we'll get watching the recording.
All right. Well, he noted he did say briefly, so I'll try to keep it brief. My name is Earl Anderson. I am the current APA Virginia chapter president, past PDO, and past pretty much everything else on the board since 2004. I've really enjoyed being part of the chapter organization. I am currently a senior planner with the Planning and Development Services in York County, Virginia, and I'm looking forward to answering some questions this afternoon. So that was brief enough for you, Andrew?
That works. All right, Christine, if you wouldn't mind just starting that recording for us.
Okay, sounds good. Cross your fingers. It worked for me 5 minutes ago, everybody, so let's see what we can do here.
Welcome to the Ethics Cases of the Year for 2020, brought to you by the Virginia chapter of the Planning Association. My name is Andrew Hopewell. I am the Professional Development Officer for the Virginia chapter, and with me today is a very esteemed panel. I'll let them introduce themselves. Elaine Eccles, FAICP, Elaine, would you tell everyone a little bit about your experience and what you've seen over the many years?
Sure. Elaine Eccles, and I am semi-retired right now. Most recently retired from Albemarle County as the Chief of Planning. I've been in the trenches more than in the supervisory role for most of my career, although I did supervise while I was in the trenches. I do a little bit of consulting on the side. I've been a planner for about 40 years. I worked for Albemarle County for about 23 years. I worked for the town of Blacksburg and also for the city of Waynesboro and several cities in Texas. So I've been doing this kind of work for a little while now and enjoy it.
Terrific, and we're very glad you're with us today. Next up, Julie Pastor, FAICP. Julie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Julie Pastor. And of course, from I guess it was 1992 to 2015, and then when I retired, I was the planning director for Loudoun County. Before that, I held a variety of positions, both in the public and the private sector, mostly in the DC metro area. I worked for a couple of national consulting firms, as well as federal. I worked at HUD, and I worked for the city of Washington, D.C. When I became a fellow, and soon thereafter, thanks to Jim Zook, I have became the chairperson of the FAICP committee for the chapter. And I have also served on the board, the committee for the FAICP committee at the national level. And I'm currently serving on a task force that's looking at addressing some of the inclusion issues related to getting into the college and beyond. I'm also, I have really retired in terms of doing any consulting work, but I am currently on the Leesburg Board of Architectural Review. So welcome, everybody.
Terrific. Thank you, Julie. We're lucky to have you not just here today, but helping out with the chapter as well. Last but certainly not least, Jim Zook, FAICP. Jim, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's well and stays well in these very challenging times. A little bit of background. I started my career in Chesterfield County, Virginia, and started as I guess a senior planner, or maybe less than that. I don't know. I started actually out as 5/8 of a person while I was in grad school. So after 11 years there, I was invited to apply to the Fairfax County Director of Planning and Zoning position. And I was somewhat surprised by that because I had just been promoted to planning director in Chesterfield 6 months prior, but you know, somebody's judgment said that might be the right thing to do. I got to Fairfax in 1986 and retired from planning director position in 2010, but then stayed with the county for about a year and a half, maybe a little less, working on the Tyson's plan and also the Lorton area study plan or implementation. I do a little bit of consulting and emphasize a little bit. Mostly it's expert witness stuff on land use issues involving right-of-way takes or tax disputes. Funny thing there, when I was planning director, and I think all the planning directors have been in this position, we get called upon to be the expert witness at many opportunities to do that, none of which have you scheduled any time for. So at that particular time, I was saying, can't you guys just settle this? Can't you just settle it? However, when you're private sector doing it, you kind of said, did you have to settle this so soon? Anyway, right now I'm, I guess, president of the HOA 2700 family community in Western Fairfax, and also was fortunate to be appointed to the Fairfax County Park Authority Board. So I'm enjoying that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. As you can see, we have quite the esteemed group with us today sharing their experience and knowledge. As I said, I'm Andrew Hopewell. I am the Professional Development Officer for the Virginia chapter. This is my 4th year in that position. When not fulfilling that role, I've been a long-range and comprehensive planner in both Spotsylvania and Fauquier counties for approximately the past 15 years or so. And I am coming up to become the Virginia chapter's president-elect. So I'll be passing on this mantle to John Harbin for future conferences. So what we're going to be doing today, our agenda is we're going to quickly run through a refresher on planning ethics, some references to the code, the principles of planning, and running over some of the information about some of the inquiries that came in over the past year. And then we're going to run through 7 different scenarios, which is where my esteemed colleagues are going to come in and share some of their experience. These scenarios are going to deal with issues such as confidential information, professional misrepresentation, personal property, social equity, virtual public engagement, endorsements, and finally elected office. So the purpose of this session is to help provide planners with general education regarding the AICP Code of Ethics. Again, for those certified planners, you know that ethics sessions are a little bit difficult to find because they must be related to the AICP Code of Ethics. So the only formal ethics advice that can be received is from the AICP Ethics Committee. There is the AICP Ethics Officer who is able to give informal advice. You can certainly reach out to experienced planners, to chapter board members, but please recognize that any advice that they may be able to give is strictly informal. The only formal advice that can be received is from the AICP Ethics Committee. So AICP's Code of Ethics is broken down into 5 different parts. Part A is related to aspirational principles, and this is looking at responsibility to the public, to clients, employees, as well as to the profession and colleagues. The second section is related to rules of conduct, and this lists out 26 rules to which AICP members are held accountable. So again, this is where censorship could come into play should someone violate one of these 26 rules. Section C is advisory opinions. This is looking at informal advice, formal advisory opinions, the annual report. These are more of the housekeeping type statutes within the Code of Ethics. Section D is to do with complaints of misconduct. Again, the formalities related to filings, preliminary charges or dismissals, settlement, decision, and appeal process. And finally, Section E is related to the discipline of members, whether they get a confidential letter, a public censure, suspension, or ultimately a revocation of their credentials. The principles of planning from the American Planning Association are 3 guidelines for advisor advocates and decision makers in the planning process. The first is to always serve the public interest and to make sure that the information that's being provided is accurate, that there's opportunity for all to participate in the process, to protect the natural and built environment, and to make sure that planners are paying attention to the long-range consequences of their actions. The second principle is to maintain high standards of integrity and proficiency. In this instance, planners are expected to provide independent judgment, disclose personal interest, seek no gifts or favors, avoid conflicts of interest, be sure not to disclose confidential information, not to misrepresent facts, as well as to respect the rights of all persons. And finally, the third principle is to improve planning competence. And in this instance, it's to provide high levels of professionalism, to commit no wrongful acts, to contribute time for groups lacking planning resources, and to ensure that other professions are being treated fairly. So in 2019, there were 19 total cases that were presented. 7 of those cases were dismissed without even preliminary charges being filed. 2 cases were dismissed after the preliminary charges were filed, and 10 cases were settled, 8 of those for the misuse of an AICP credential, and in 2 cases there were disciplinary actions with confidential letters of admonition, 1 for the disclosure of confidential information and 1 for secondary employment and special advantage. Again, here's a summary of the topics in terms of informal inquiries that came into the ethics officer, as well as the misconduct cases. Again, the most common being the quality of practice and the conflicts of interest questions. You can see the others tailing down to finally a lack of cooperation with ethics officer being the minority. The cases of the year, as you can see from the graphic here, were spread out across the entirety of the country. The scenarios that are generated that we're going to be looking at a little bit later on are largely based on these real life situations that came up in 2019 and 2020. Obviously, the names and the locations have been changed and are fictional, but they were real life situations that came about either through informal inquiries or misconduct complaints that came to the ethics officer and the ethics committee. So with that, we're going to get to the fun and look at our cast of characters for these scenarios that we're going to be discussing. One of our characters is Jane, who's a consultant who is a certified planner. Another character is Lucio, who's a planning director and also a certified planner. We have a small town planner in Catherine, who's also AICP. An elected official, Marcy, who is not a certified planner. And finally, a staff planner named Norman, who is a certified planner. So our first scenario, which relates to confidential information, starts off with Marcy, who is a restaurant owner and a member of the Costaville City Council, sending an email to Lucio, AICP, who's the planning director, inquiring about the process for conditional use permits. She's concerned about a pet grooming store that's opening next door to her restaurant. Lucio tells the pet store owner about Marcy's email, and the next time the owner sees Marcy, he yells at her and accuses her of trying to stop the project. When Marcy asks Lucio why he told the owner about her email, he says that because she is an elected official, this information was public. Marcy notes that she had not inquired, or she had inquired on her restaurant email and not from her city council email. And further, she notes that the owner had not made any FOIA requests for the emails. She says the comments made by the pet store owner have had a negative impact on her business. So the first set of questions related to this is, was Lucio correct in disclosing this information to the applicant? And the second part of it is, did he violate the AICP ethics code in disclosing this information? So Julie and Elaine, I'm going to ask you guys for your opinions on this, and I'll pull up some of the relevant code sections while you're discussing it.
Yeah, so first, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Andrew. So first, let's take a look at what the ethical issues are, the code sections, and they're up on the screen here. And basically, they are the aspirational principles regarding the, being conscious of the rights of others, and also being aware of the consequences of your actions, and the ability to deal fairly with everybody. And then perhaps most important to this case, we look at the rules of conduct, which talk about that we should recognize, when something is confidential, because its disclosure could embarrass somebody or could be detrimental to the client or the employer. I think with the information provided, Lucio had no compelling reason to share the email with the applicant, because frankly, other than knowing who to call or what the email was of the town council member, she did whatever any other citizen would do, which is really to contact the official planning office and find out what are the typical ways of going about processing an application. Plus, she didn't use any official communication mechanisms to make that call. So from my perspective, it is a clear violation of the rules of conduct number 7. I think the issue for me is that it's really important that as a planning department or even a planning director, that we convey general concerns that we might see with an application to the applicant and let them know kind of what's going on and what they ought to be aware of. Typically, we would have procedures for that. And certainly the planning director would know those procedures of making information, either sharing information or the procedure for reviewing an application, and he should be following it. But there are certainly ways, and we did many times, try to guide applicants through the process for one opportunity would be to suggest to an applicant that they reach out to their neighbors and make them aware of what's going on and that kind of thing. That would be certainly very appropriate. But to reveal to the applicant that a town council member is your neighbor, and oh, by the way, they don't like your project, that was really not appropriate. I think also, and maybe Elaine's going to jump in a little bit on this, for purposes of argument, if this were a legislative application, it'd be a whole different kettle of fish. Certainly, Marcy would have to recuse herself as being an affected party. She would have had no business even contacting the planning director, but even if she did, the planning director would have said, hey, I know you've got a conflict of interest in this, certainly stay apprised. He can certainly give her information about when it's going to come forward or whatever, but that would be a whole different kettle of fish. In this particular scenario, unfortunately, I think Lucio really blew it. What do you think, Elaine?
Well, and I think a lot of it depends on what the rules of the locality are. I know that in Albemarle County, people were always interested if they had a project in front of the planning commission or board of supervisors. Applicants were always interested in how the different decision makers felt about something. And so in this one, I think that I feel like Lucio was just a little bit of a tattletale, and that he was just offering information that wasn't appropriate to offer. And if there was a situation where the person had an applicant, the pet store owner had an application in front of him, or had made an application, I'm sorry, and wanted to know, well, what do you, from the planning director, what do you think the other decision makers, how they would feel about this? Well, the planning director should say, you need to contact them if they'll talk to you, and if not, look at the issues that might come up. Let me guide you in the way of, these are the kinds of things that we typically look at in a review. But I think you're right, it was at a minimum very poor judgment, and a maximum just disclosing confidential information. He just didn't need to do it.
Thanks. Andrew, how about we come back to you and look at what happened?
Sure. So this was actually one of those instances that was cited in the cases. In real life, the ethics officer and the ethics committee both agreed that Lucio should not have disclosed the information. By doing so, they said that he had caused embarrassment to Marcy, and thus it was a violation of the Rule of Conduct 7 related to confidential information. In this instance, he received a confidential letter of admonition and the case was closed. So really, at the planning director's level, he should have known better. Let's move on to our second scenario, and this is related to professional misrepresentation. In this scenario, Jane, who's a consultant, learns that our planning director, Lucio, is blaming Jane for a recent defeat by City Council of a sub-area plan that she worked on. In a meeting, Lucio tells the mayor that Jane's firm should never be hired again. Jane hears this from Norman, who's also a certified planner, who knows the plan's failure was due to Lucio's poor political skills. Norman, who works for Lucio, was in the meeting. Because Costabile has been a major client of Jane's firm, Lucio's statement to the mayor will have a major impact. Jane decides to file a complaint of ethical misconduct against Lucio, citing a violation of Rule 10 in the AICP Ethics Code. Unfortunately, there is no proof of what Lucio said to the mayor, and because Norman, AICP, says that he cannot step forward to attest to what was said in the meeting, the complaint is dismissed. But the questions that we want to ask is, did Jane have a good basis to file an ethics misconduct complaint against Lucio? And did Norman have an obligation to cooperate with the investigation and to testify as to what he heard in the meeting? So for this one, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you and Julie chime in on your thoughts on this one.
Okay, thank you. First, a review of some of the issues that might be associated with the ethical issues. We need to be sure that we treat other professionals in a fair and professional manner. Also, if we, with indifference or deliberately misrepresent the qualification, views, or findings of other professionals, that's something that should be avoided. In addition, I guess we're charged with the responsibility to participate with an ethics review if requested to do so. So I guess my initial reaction is that Lucio is kind of a piece of work, isn't he? So, I think that clearly the planner had a right and maybe a responsibility to report that kind of comment that was made, especially with regard to the nature of continuing business to work in this community, which apparently they have been working in for a long time with a good reputation. So I think while maybe not everybody would report such a thing, I think she was well within her rights and maybe responsibilities to do that. On the other hand, with regard to cooperating in the investigation, I think the broader question there is, did Lucio have a responsibility? And I think the answer to that is yes, he did. Now, that's not the question. The question is, should Norman do it? In thinking about that, the thing that struck me is the comment about political incompetence, and that's the reason the plan failed. I think all planning directors and maybe many staff members have done something that is politically different than what people would like to have happen. That's not necessarily, you're in the process of doing the right thing. Now, in this case, it's Norman's judgment that it was the political interference or incompetence that caused the failure of the plan. I guess I have no reason to dispute that. And if that's true, it probably is fairly debatable with regard to if Lucio had actually come up and spoke with the review committee. So I think that's where I am with it. And Julie?
Well, so I agree with you that Lucio is definitely having a bad day. I think that she did have a fairly strong case, I think, for raising this issue. It's not uncommon, as you all know, that there are oftentimes coffee pot discussions about the quality of a consultant's work and, who was to blame, what really happened, that kind of thing. That happens very frequently. But the notion that there was a meeting and that was precipitated by the planning director to go and tell the mayor, you need to badmouth this firm for the rest of eternity because they really did a bad job. That was really poor judgment on his part. And I think it was difficult for Norman to step up, but I also worry about, again, the talking out of school component of this. And he really, if he was really felt that way, then number one, he should have brought it up to Lucio to begin with and, had a conversation about, you really didn't do a very good service to these folks when we need to own it. We need to own if we weren't really, completely up to the task. So I think he kind of failed on a couple of instances. I'm not sure whether, if I was in his shoes, whether I would have stepped up either. But I also know that by him not stepping up, it really doesn't speak very well of the process that we should use. Thanks.
Elaine, did you want to chime in?
Sorry, I was muted. No, I think that that we all have to be responsible for our own actions, and we need to be considerate and respectful of our peers, and in public, we just have to be professional about everything.
Very good. Andrew, you want to tell us what happened?
Sure. So in this instance, and it was a real life case, unfortunately, no one in the meeting, including at least one AICP member, was willing to corroborate the allegation to the ethics officer, even with the promise of confidentiality. So after several months, unfortunately, this misconduct complaint was dismissed due to lack of evidence. So it's rather a tricky situation all around there. Our third scenario actually has two parts to it. So we'll run through both the parts and then get to the discussion portion. But so in this one, it's to do with personal property. And Norman, who's the staff planner with Costaville, is working on a rezoning proposal for a transit-oriented development corridor in accordance with a new sub-area plan. A member of the public tells Norman that he has a conflict of interest since he lives just 2 blocks from the TOD corridor, and the rezoning could increase the value of his house. Norman asks his supervisor, Lucio, if another staff planner could work on the project given the proximity of the proposed TOD district to Norman's house. Lucio tells Norman that due to staff constraints, he needs to work on the project. But he says Norman should disclose this potential conflict of interest at all public meetings. So our questions on this first part of the scenario are have both planners behaved in accordance with the Code of Ethics? And do you agree with the decision of Lucio, who's Norman's supervisor? And now we're going to go on and look at the second part of this scenario before we discuss it. So the second part, Catherine, who's the only planner for Bowerville, a small ski town, and her town manager has asked her to develop guidelines for vacation rentals based on a growing number of complaints from community residents. Catherine has owned a second home in Bowerville for the past 5 years, which she often rents out on Airbnb or VRBO. So the questions here are, should Catherine work on this project? And if no, how should she handle this request? So for this one, Julie, I believe we're coming back to you to discuss this one with Jim.
Okay, so let's again take a look at the issues at play here, and I think we've got a few. One is obvious one under aspirational principles, which is we need to avoid a conflict of interest or even the appearance. You know, does it pass the red face test for conflict of interest? We also want to make sure that unless our client or employer gives a full written disclosure to us or consents to something in writing to the arrangement, we should not perform work on a project. And then finally, it really is not a matter of public knowledge or is not in the public interest. We should not, seek to obtain a special advantage, which again goes back to the whole conflict of interest thing. I think that it's not uncommon in jurisdictions where there is very few staff or staff spread too thin, where you have a situation where you're the only one who can handle a case. But the bottom line for me in this one is disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. First of all, Norman should not have had to wait for a member of the public to tell him he had a conflict of interest. I think that out of the box is kind of ridiculous. He did the right thing, obviously, by then going immediately to his supervisor and telling him that, hey, I have a conflict of interest. And I think, again, I don't know Lucio's situation in terms of staffing, but I've been in a scenario where you don't have anybody else and you've got to, your resources are spread thin, and so you have to handle the case. You have to be able to handle the case. But again, at every juncture, there needs to be disclosure. When you're making the presentation, when you're upfront with the applicant, you're upfront with the public. That's absolutely essential. And I think on the Catherine side, it's even a little bit more difficult because she is the one horse, the head of everything. And I think what she did, what she needs to do, and that goes to the questions that you posed, was she needs to look at every avenue possible to recuse herself from this effort. The fact that it is a broad effort in the jurisdiction, it's not necessarily directed to her property particularly. But again, it doesn't pass the red face test in terms of, the appearance of a conflict of interest. So I think she needs to really explore every avenue possible to get additional help on this. And also she, like Norman, needs to disclose, so that everybody is aware that she can participate in this process fairly and objectively, and that she acknowledges that she has a conflict. This happens, most recently, as I mentioned, I'm serving on a board of architectural review. Even if I run into somebody that I know, I'm not even acting on their particular case or a case that they might be next to. I always say at the disclosure part of the meeting, hey, I ran into so-and-so who I knew, and I still feel like I can, I had a conversation about his project or whatever, but I feel like I can fairly and objectively participate in the project. So disclosure. What do you think, Jim?
Probably the only thing I'd add is another disclosure. I think the staff resource question is really the issue, and I'm assuming that there was no other alternative but to disclose. Also, I think when making that kind of judgment or decision to go ahead and participate, you also need to be concerned about conflict of interest that would be perceived even if you did not do that. So it's almost better, in my mind, to go forth with the responsibility that you have and there's no other alternative, and disclose every time so that it's very clear out there. And then you're actually painting the target on your own back. People will watch what you're doing. And on the other side of this, or the same side, is that you're going to do professional work. Professional work is going to be evaluated, and people can see through something that isn't sufficiently evaluated to your personal benefit. So I don't think there is a problem, except there needs to be that upfront reminder that she does own property in the area. So with regard to both cases, actually, that's my thought.
Elaine, did you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to say that in terms of the staff report that needed to be written, in addition to the disclosure, you need to be as fair and as impartial as you could possibly be on paper, and make sure that people understand that you are giving the full, all sides of a story, or all the aspects of information that are important for the decision makers to make their decision. But I think being fair is so essential in your evaluation of the project.
I think you've really hit the target there, Elaine. That is really a key in any case. I mean, you absolutely need to stick to the facts, and make sure that you are reviewing against policy, against ordinance. You're really, really clear about that kind of thing. That is a little bit of a difference in Catherine's situation, because it's more of again, a policy evaluation. So it's very difficult to kind of not put your professional judgment in there. That's not, not coming without some aspect of your experience as a whole. But I think absolutely looking at all sides and making sure that every staff report or analysis contains the full breadth and possibility of the options, and it is really important. So thanks. Andrew, do you want to, oh, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Really just, I guess, a quick story. I was a director of planning and zoning in Fairfax. I think we know in this area there was that issue of 2 tall houses. I think you remember that. I do anyway. So I'm sitting around a table with 4 or 5 staff people looking at this particular development, and all of a sudden I realized, looking at this one house on this one street with this one address, that it was my brother's house. So what I did was basically say, okay, please continue. I'm going to absent myself from the room. And by the way, would someone please go out and measure my brother's house? As it turned out, it met the code, but it was probably the only one in the community that did. And the other thing I'd point out is maybe it's akin to your experience with disclosure, Julie, is I found that in an effort to not have any conflict, when I would get a call from someone I knew or a friend, actually, it was more difficult for me to help them than it would be an actual stranger coming off the street. So it's just got to be careful with what you do and the equal treatment of everybody as a standard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it just, I come back to that whole red face test. If you can't with a straight face, you just really just err on the side of disclosing it. It's so much easier and it's so much more professional to do it. So Andrew, what was the outcome on this one?
All right. So in this instance, Norman, getting some credit back, Julie, from your point, did provide evidence to the ethics officer that he had in advance already notified his supervisor of the potential conflict of interest. And Lucio had then told him to continue to work on the project and to fully disclose his ownership interest at all public meetings. And so subsequently, in this instance, the misconduct charge was dismissed. In the second part of the scenario, Catherine was still trying to decide how to best handle her vacation rental issue, because in that case, the town did not have the resources to hire a consultant. But in line of what all of you were saying, she was planning to disclose her property ownership in writing to both her supervisor and the planning commission. So again, disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. Our fourth scenario that we're looking at today has to do with social equity. In this instance, our staff planner, Norman, has been assigned to review the site plan for a group home for refugee immigrant children, who've been separated from their parents. The site plan meets all of the legal requirements, but Norman is concerned about the quality of the operation as well as the long-term separation of the children from their parents. He voices these concerns to his supervisor, Lucio, who says he's very sympathetic. But Lucio notes that the mayor wants to get the approval done as fast as possible before the NIMBYs get wind of this, says the mayor. Lucio tells Norman to focus just on the facts of the site plan review process in his staff report and not to mention any of his social equity concerns. So our questions here are, is Lucio correct ethically to tell Norman to only focus the staff report on the facts relevant to the site plan review? And is there anything else that Norman should do or say? Some of the options presented here are to speak directly to the mayor, or to investigate what other communities have done, or to leak the story to the media, or some other one. So Elaine, I'm gonna turn this one over to you to discuss with Jim as to what you think Norman and Lucio should have been doing here.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about this scenario. We don't know all the information, such as whether this is a site plan in this locality in this state is for a by right use, and if that staff report is just a perfunctory or just for an information only action, or if there really is a decision-making role for whomever the staff report is directed. And that's pretty key in this in terms of whether or not there was a violation. But let's talk about the 6 topics that are at play here. From the aspirational principles, we have a special responsibility to speak for those who have no voice. And if there is something inherently wrong with the rules, we do need to speak up. It's a question of how do you speak up. So Norman's concerned for the children, the parents, and the operator of the facility. He's heard bad things about the operator, and he has problems with the policy of separating children from their parents. And let's say he strongly disagrees with the policy, so he does speak to his boss. The second one is we have an obligation to follow the direction of our client or employer unless there's something illegal or plainly inconsistent with the public interest. And in this instance, Norman's boss tells him to focus on the facts, not his opinions. So there doesn't seem to be anything illegal about the request. The next one is we should look for a solution that's appropriate to the situation. We'll come back to that one. We must provide timely, clear, and accurate information. There's a really good question here about whether the request that was made by the mayor or the direction by the mayor was the way things are done in that locality. And if there is a reason for the staff report to say something about a context, there might be an opportunity for providing some clear and accurate information, but there's still more that needs to be done on this one. We aren't to accept an assignment that we know is illegal or in clear violation of the AICP Code of Ethics. Here we are asked, are we being asked to do something ethically wrong? And I'll come back to that one here in just a minute too. If we are in a supervisory position, we're not to direct other professionals to analyze situations or reach conclusions that aren't supported by available evidence. And this one is a lot like the one before when we talk about the facts. We need to be providing facts in a staff report. We need to be providing facts and not opinions. The real question on this one for me is whether or not the mayor is asking the staff to do something in a different way. Is the mayor asking for a change in the rules and a change in the way things are done in that locality? And if the mayor is asking for that, then I think both Lucio and Norman are well within their rights to say, this is not the way we do things. You need to know this, that this starts to make everybody look bad in the locality. There's also an issue of needing to shine light on things, but in a way that makes sense under the circumstance. And that's where we get into is this the appropriate solution for the situation? A site plan in Virginia basically is a by right action, and most of the time there would not be an opportunity to provide any additional information on what may really be going on here. But there are other opportunities and other ways that information can be shared, like Norman telling his boss. And we know that Norman's boss, Lucio, is sympathetic. So Lucio can potentially carry the torch for shining some light in places that Norman couldn't do it. It's just really important that planners know and that they don't do anything illegal, but it's always important to speak up if you think there's something that doesn't smell right. In some communities, in a very active community, once there's information on the docket, there will be people asking questions. And can y'all still hear me? Say yes, yeah. Good. I got a note that said my internet connection was unstable. So anyway, I don't want to go on too long, but to say there are some things here that don't pass a good smell test. But in terms of the job that Norman does and that Lucio does, they may not have any other options but to provide the facts and let someone else carry the torch for this one. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with what you've said. And I would think that there should have been some pushback on the mayor's request to expedite it, because that's just a prescription for failure, especially with something that has the potential for being not necessarily the action you're taking, not necessarily being in the public interest. So I think the council needs to be concerned, or the mayor needs to be concerned about the implications of not handling this straightforwardly. With regard to the site plan discussion, yeah, I don't think the social equity concern that he has is appropriately dealt with, or maybe even legally dealt with, in a site plan process that we would, I guess, attempt to overturn a site plan because of that. Because in Virginia, as you noted, you're pretty much in a by right status there. Certainly, it's an administrative status. So being told to keep his eye on that ball, I think, is appropriate. What might be done as an alternative is that if there is this real concern, and it can be documented that it's a public health safety issue, meaning that something in the site plan or something in the building plans are really stimulating this concern about the safety of the individuals, then I think it's legitimate to address it. Even though it might not be a matter of site plan, it's known as a matter of a building permit, and that's how it should be addressed. So, I think that if I had been in that situation, I would have advised the mayor that this isn't the route we should go. And maybe that goes with the political issues that Lucio had before. But I think he has the right to know, or she has the right to know, what the professional advice is and what the long-term implications of an action that would either speed this up or somehow stifle it in terms of it being discussed is inappropriate. I would think that there's another way to go about this, and that if in fact there's a real concern over this being a facility that isn't appropriate, I would think that you could have the social service department or human services department get involved, not human services, the social services get involved. And they certainly have the competence and perhaps even the authority to look into serious issues with regard to group homes.
I want to pipe in on kind of picking up where you left off, Elaine, on your notion of changing the process part, and not to pick on Lucio again, but I will. I really feel like it comes back to being able to have conversations with elected officials. As a planning director, our jobs are to obviously always provide our best professional advice and counsel. And, we don't vote, so they go off and do it. But the fact of the matter is, Lucio needs to bring all information to the table and should have a relationship with the mayor or any members of the town council to be able to say, hey, we need to make absolutely sure that we have all of the information and that we are, getting all of the facts out and all of the information out on this case. And the appearance of kind of ramming this through or dealing with it expeditiously could backfire, and being honest about what that as a possibility. That's not to say I totally agree with you on the fact that this particular case, I'm not sure, given that it's a site plan, that it's really going to get itself elevated. In fact, Jim might be absolutely right. The best way to handle it is with other agencies that could really do some evaluation of the facility, or the operators even have actually more information than we have about the operation that really could help us make a decision on this.
Right. I also think that if there was an opportunity to, in a staff report, provide the context for the decision, if there is a decision to be made, there's some information that can be put out there to shed light on what the facility is about. But letting the public process take place, I think, is going to be the best thing for this particular project. I trust the public process, and you're absolutely right, both of you are. You don't just run roughshod over a project and expect that the public will be okay with that. And so it's really important that it's back to treating each project and each applicant fairly and providing the facts. And if you can provide some context, it can be beneficial to allowing other people that torch on to do their job. So Andrew, tell us.
I was just say, you set me up so nicely that it dovetailed well with the outcomes of what you were saying there, Elaine, because in this case, Norman and Lucio were seeking some additional background information on communities that had dealt with that group home operator. And then also in terms of the public and their awareness, a local community group was raising its own concerns about the project in public meetings, media stories, and social media posts. So again, I think you guys really hit that one on the head. So moving on now, we are looking at scenario number 5, which has to do with virtual public engagement. And so this is something we've all become much more familiar with as we're sitting here in our respective homes recording this. But during the recent viral pandemic, Costaville moved its public meetings to web-based platforms where public engagement was handled through online forums and chat rooms. With continued concerns about face-to-face interactions, the mayor has told his planning director, Lucio, to use a similar technology for an upcoming sub-area plan workshop. Lucio tells the mayor that this will exclude many residents who don't have access to or proficiency with computers. Also, some residents won't be able to access the draft documents. Finally, Lucio says many of these same people have concerns about affordable housing, which is a key element of the draft plan they're working on. Lucio suggests delaying the plan until an in-person workshop can be held. The mayor, however, fearing the loss of state funding for the plan, orders him to go ahead with the virtual public workshop. Our questions are, should Lucio obey the mayor and schedule the virtual workshop? What is the key ethical issue facing Lucio in relating to the AICP ethics code? So Elaine, I'm going to ask you to lead this one and have Julie chime in when you're ready.
Sure. And I will say that the three of us have been out of local government work sufficiently long to not be in charge of making sure that all the public engagement takes place with a particular activity like the development of a plan. And there are going to be many planners who are looking at this who have a lot more experience with dealing with virtual public engagement or engaging the public in important things during this pandemic. There are good questions about how do you engage the public in both a realistic and an equitable way. In this scenario, the planners need to engage the public quickly because they are on a limited schedule due to a funding window. The mayor has directed the staff to use methods of public engagement to allow for everyone to be engaged. So there's some good questions here, and if we look to the principles, we find a few things. We're to provide information to all affected persons and decision makers. Lucio is being asked to use technology for which not everyone has access, and this is clearly a problem. We are to give all people a legitimate opportunity for participation. We have a special responsibility to speak up for those people who can't speak up for themselves. And along with that, we also have to do what our employer tells us to do. Going on to the next one, in the rules of conduct, we have to provide accurate, adequate, and timely information on planning issues. And then we aren't supposed to direct other professionals to that are not supported by facts. And of course, we can't discriminate against another person. It just violates everything about our ethics. So the first question is about the mayor saying, we want you to do this. And I think Lucio is right in pushing back and saying, wait a second, there are some people here who are not going to be represented. And we need to look at that, kind of like we did with the last one. We need to look at what the implications of those will be. Is your plan going to be really a legitimate plan if everybody who's affected isn't getting to participate? How is that going to play out when, at least at the public hearing, people who find a way to participate in the public hearing and criticize the whole process. So I think there are some very, it doesn't smell good. Julie talks about the red face test and I talk about the smell test. Does it smell good? No, it does not smell good at all, because it isn't a legitimate process. And even though the mayor is saying this is what we should do, that planning director's got to push back, and he has to make sure that he has that in writing, that I said, we really need to make sure that everybody who has an issue with this plan gets to participate fairly and equitably. Now, there is the issue of having a computer, knowing how to operate a computer, having internet access that's reliable, and being able to participate. And I think that people who want to participate also have an obligation to, if they're aware that something's going on, to see if there's something they can do. But the local government also has got to have a plan in place for how to help people participate if they don't have the technology. Right now, I think, and I'm not positive, and we'll learn more about this later on, I think at the session, but telephoning in right now, I think, is the only other alternative. Julie and Jim, you all may know more than I do, but telephoning in to participate in an event where planning is taking place. But I think clearly there is an ethical issue here, and that Lucio really should not be going ahead with this, because he can't say that the public's interests are being protected. Julie.
Yes. Yeah, so I agree with you completely. I also feel like maybe Lucio has redeemed himself a little bit, because he has raised the issue that, hey, you can't have a public process without the public. So, I think he does need to get a little bit more creative. However, I think, as you indicate, we're not the technology gurus anymore. But there are certainly many other ways to get public input. I would have no problem going forward with a virtual kind of interface on this as one piece of the discussion. But I think there are many other ways. I mean, we can use libraries. You can, solicit comments, on note cards, and then the staff goes and picks them up. Or, like you mentioned, there can be call-ins on the phone if you are using that kind of technology. But up to this point, Lucio hasn't just demonstrated very much creativity, but I'm sure he's got it in him, and he can find creative ways to include the public in this process, because frankly, virtual outreach on its own misses the mark. It's not inclusive. So I just think that there are other ways of communicating. I know that a lot of the newspapers, for instance, are now also all online, but we do still have libraries, and we do still have the phone, and we have other public places where information can be distributed and or collected to make it part of the process. But we definitely want to make sure that we are inclusive, because otherwise we don't have a legitimate public process in adoption of this plan.
Well, and so this is our one scenario that is a hypothetical. It was written early on in the pandemic, so Lucio didn't have a chance to either redeem himself with creativity or damn himself with a lack of creativity. But there is at least one community out there that's facing a lawsuit by a group of residents who say they were not able to participate in a planning commission meeting on a controversial project during the pandemic due to their lack of internet access. So this is something that has reared its head, unfortunately.
Andrew?
Yes.
I think the extent to which you can provide additional public comment on critical issues is important. However, also the public business is important. And in this case, there might not be a plan at all if the funding is taken away. So that's just by one example. There are other I guess, critical issues that boards, the supervisors, and planning commission members, and even Fairfax County Park Authority have had to deal with to keep things moving, even though not everybody has access to those meetings. So there is an aspect of acting in the public interest on timely issues. And at the same time, if there is a concern about social equity, as there always should be, then maybe there's special attention taken with regard to the staff or whomever might be working on it to, as Joey said, be creative about involvement, or certainly take up the slack and maybe be more of an advocate that you might normally be, because the presence of those who need to be there can't be there.
Right, right. And I think it's also important to note that at least with comprehensive plans, depending on what was being done here, are meant to be living documents that can be edited, can be changed, can be updated as additional information comes to light. So it's important to move forward, ensuring that you're not committing harm on any of those communities that maybe were not able to be represented at that time, but recognize that you need to go back and get their input and feedback and be able to incorporate that into the plan as well. So, all right. Let's look at our sixth scenario. This has to do with endorsements. So Jane, who we haven't heard too much about recently, who's a planning consultant, asks if Catherine, a planner with Bowerville, is willing to be interviewed about the town's award-winning comprehensive plan, which Jane's firm worked on. The interview will be handled by a PR firm who's been hired to prepare a promotional video for the consulting firm. That same week, a company who's building a new water park in Bowerville, whose site plan Catherine reviewed and approved, asks if she could write a separate approval letter. When Catherine asks why, the owners say that they would like to use this letter when dealing with other jurisdictions. So in this case, our questions are, should Catherine agree to be interviewed for the promotional video? And should Catherine agree to write a letter of recommendation for the water park operator? And Julie, I think you are going to lead this conversation with Jim.
Yep. Hey. So I'll go over the ethical issues first, but I do want to, again, disclose that having worked for the private sector for many years, it is not uncommon whatsoever for a consulting firm to, to seek endorsements from jurisdictions and, for work well done. But I think, we need to be very cognizant of the fact of what the interrelatedness of decisions that we make. And also, again, that there is not any kind of appearance of a conflict of interest when we're pursuing them. And we're also, not using our office to obtain some sort of special advantage, in the work. But I do feel, like I said, that a lot of consultants oftentimes will ask, but the thing we need to keep in mind is that usually when it comes to a plan anyway, that's the community's, it's a community benefit that their good work came forward. And as such, the public officials should be the one who make the endorsements because they're community-wide. I also feel that it may not be the mayor, but it would be some other public official that might be even better for that. So the short answer is basically no to the promotional video. And I'm not really sure even what a separate approval letter would be. We never had one of those, but I would say no to that too. But it really, I always prided myself on making sure that I didn't get quoted in the paper. So even when the phone calls came in, and I always instructed my staff as well that you stick to the facts, you talk about when decisions are being made or what the plan was, and that kind of thing. But you don't want to really go off on a limb. It's just not appropriate for the staff to be put in that position. And I was with the county for 22 years, and I think I can count on one hand the number of times that I had my name in the paper. A couple that were not great, but not of my own making. But I think it's really, really important. You know, we obviously want to spread the good word about good work, but I really don't think it's appropriate for the staff to be going out on a limb on these things and singing the praises of or not of work that's done there. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I think it's remarkable that you weren't in the paper more frequently. My grandfather once told me, he said, Jim, there's two places to stay out of. One is jail, the other's the paper. So I've done pretty well with both of those, I think. I agree with, you know, what you've said. It just occurred to me, maybe not so much relying on the principles, but is that just good practice to do that? Yeah. And having said that, so much of what we carry as our way of operating is learned over a number of years, what we believe to be right and what we believe to be wrong. And I just suggest that most of us have that internal clock that you recognize without looking at the principles, whether in fact something's right or wrong. So, but I don't have anything else to add to what you've said, Julie.
Yeah, I think like you say, the alarm clock goes off. Oh, this is over the top. But I also, I forgot to mention, I mean, I oftentimes would get a call from a consultant and say, hey, will you be a reference for me? That's another example of when the alarm clock goes off, and you need to be very careful to direct any specific performance issues to the contracting officer. You know, if it was a question of, you know, did they deliver things on time or whatever, you know, and then I was always careful that, you know, that if I was asked for that reference, by a third party, hey, did you ever have work done by such and such a firm, that I was always very careful to just stick to the facts. You know, what did they do? When did they do it? Was the delivery on time, etc. And you like you say, you learn these things over time, because so many of these things can come back and bite you, and you know, you don't want to be put in that position. Andrew, what do you think? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just wanted to say that this also comes back to what is your normal procedure. Somebody's asking you to go out of your normal procedure, that should be a red flag. And pretty much you can stay on the straight and narrow if you treat everybody the same way. And you don't look like you're playing favorites because you treat everybody the same way. So anyway, just treating, not making any changes for a particular purpose can, like this one, and keep your name out of the papers.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Elaine, that I skipped over you.
That's okay. That's okay. Andrew, I'm ready.
Yeah. Well, you guys hit the nail right on the head again. In this instance, Catherine decided not to participate in the interview, but along the lines of what Julie had said, suggested the PR firm should contact the mayor, in this case, again, one of those public officials, for comment. In the other portion, Catherine decided not to write the separate approval letter, suggesting to the developer that the formal approval letter was sufficient proof of compliance in that project. All right, so we're going to move on now to our final scenario, and this is related to elected office. So Catherine, who's our planner with Bowerville, would like to run for city council in Worcester, where she resides. In accordance with the AICP ethics code, she requests written permission from her town manager. The manager, though, is hesitant, noting that both the ICMA's ethics code and the AICP ethics code discourage such political activities. Is the town manager correct? Does the AICP ethics code recommend that certified planners not run for elected office? And if Catherine does run for city council, what ethical concerns should she have? So Jim, I think you're going to lead us on this one, and Elaine help you out with it.
With regard to the guidelines, To me, I can read those several different ways, I suppose. But it is rather explicit in that it says it's under a guideline that members shall not run for office or be involved in political activities. At the same time, aspirational principles are that we should contribute time to groups lacking adequate planning resources. And one can make the stretch that the council position that she'd like to run for is an unpaid position. There are many of those around, but if not, I guess she would be violating that if she ran. But then the fourth in the rules of conduct suggests that maybe it's okay if you fully disclose what you're doing and, you know, have permission from your employer to work additional. So I guess at the outset, I'd admire her for trying to be a planner and also a politician at the same time. There really aren't that many hours in the day, but you know, I would suggest that she not actually run for office, and principally because her employer doesn't appear to be supportive of that. I don't think the guidelines expressly prohibit her from doing it, but I think they do guide it with respect to obviously the preference, and also this one item being the guidelines rather than, you know, a code issue of more substance, I suppose. But I think she needs to be concerned about a conflict of interest in being a planner in one jurisdiction and an elected official in another jurisdiction, and I'm assuming they're generally in the same area. I don't know the extent that she can represent both, or many of the issues might not involve both localities. But certainly if there was an issue that involved both localities of some substance, then I think she needs to recuse herself on both ends, from city council as well as the planning staff, or seek to recuse. Having that, I think she needs, if she can't do that, then I think she needs to, as Julie says, disclose. So those are my thoughts on it. Elaine?
This is interesting because in this part of Virginia, there have been planners who have lived in one locality and worked in a different one that were sufficiently far enough apart that, and I guess they weren't as busy as some of us might have been, and they felt like they could do this job, be an elected official in one place and an employee somewhere else. I considered it briefly, didn't take long for me to not, from where I live and where I worked, because they were a mountain away from each other. It was over the mountain. But ultimately, what I decided was that there would always be this appearance of me trying to bring what I worked, the information or the decision making from where I worked into my political decision making, and that would probably not be beneficial to an elected official if there was some kind of an opinion that where I worked was not a desirable place to be. And so I realized there was no way to separate those two activities, and I couldn't, and also I did not have the time. But I think that's really the issue, is an appearance of a conflict of interest it's hard to do that in an area where everybody knows each other. Julie, did you have any thoughts?
Jim, you actually alluded to it, but I think number of jurisdictions, I mean, at the jurisdiction level, have kind of rules about whether or not you can, you know, sit on the planning commission and be a staff member, whether you can, you know, be a board member, and whether or not it's encouraged or discouraged. But I think at the end of the day, it is definitely the expectation of this person's supervisor the notion that they would take on this amount of effort in like your jurisdiction or mine and run for office would be unbelievably difficult. And I think it could lead to performance issues and all kinds of things that you just wouldn't want to take the chance of doing it. Then, as you say, I mean, you would be disclosing every minute, potentially, you know, the number of land use cases in Loudoun, for instance. It would just be ridiculous for you to really be effective at either job. So I wouldn't go for it.
But I think you really hit the nail on the head there. As planners, we need to be effective. And if there's something that keeps us from being effective by virtue of not having adequate time to do our job, or a perception that we're working on somebody else's behalf, or that we're really muddying the line between our professional job and then the other political job, it doesn't make for an effective planner. So you just have to be effective and realistic in what you can do.
What's up, Andrew?
Well, I think the planners heard you guys essentially, because in those instances where supervisors opposed public planners run for office, the planner decided not to run. In those cases where planners did receive written permission to run, they were very careful to recuse themselves from issues where they could be perceived as conflicts of interest where they worked. So, well, that brings us to the end of our 7 scenarios. And so just for fun, we were going to do the quick optional quiz as to who the different characters we have here. So Jane is based on Jane Jacobs, Lucio based on Lucio Costa, Catherine is Catherine Bauer Worster, Marcy's Marcy Capter, and Norman is Norman Krumholtz. As much as I'd love to continue this conversation, I really want to make sure we have time to answer the questions that have been popping up in the chat box, and have a chance to discuss with some of the other folks any of the items that have come up. So in conclusion, I just want to make the final notes here clear that, again, the only place that you can receive formal ethics advice is from the AICP Ethics Committee. You can receive informal advice from the AICP Ethics Officer, Jim Peters. His contact information is on the screen. And once again, I want to thank you all very much for tuning in. We're going to end our pre-recorded portion here and go into some live Q&A with the comments and the chats that have come up in the chat box. So we'll move on to that now. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think because of the time, I don't even think we have enough time for one of these questions. They're all pretty long-winded. So I'm just going to say we go ahead and close up shop. Folks, if you have, especially for these folks that have the questions, just go ahead and reach out directly to our panelists, or you can reach out to me. That's fine too. And we can get those questions answered for you. Again, we have recorded this session and it will be available on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to log those AICP CM credits, 1.5 ethics credits. So be sure to do that. And I think that's it. Andrew or Earl, do you have anything else to add?
No, thank you.
No.
All right, thanks everyone. And thanks to you, Andrew and Earl, for joining us today. And everyone, we'll talk next time.
Thank you.